My dad was an engineer. My mom was a doctor. I was always expected to be a mentor. The thing about flying is, it's not really a degree. Believe it or not, I was so close to throwing up.
Hi, you're listening to Everything is Personal by Fortis. I'm Victoria Belousova, Chief HR Officer at Fortis. Here I talk to successful professionals from tech companies. I want to find out what it did to build a career in Dubai. And I want to find out at what point everything went right. From game-changing decisions to lucky breaks, we uncover what made it all work. This podcast is proudly presented by Fortis, a company that bridged the gap between businesses and their digital-savvy customers. Welcome to the podcast where everything gets personal. In this final episode, I will talk to Mohamed Abouhadb, Growth Account Manager at Deliverect. An Egyptian national, Mohamed was born and raised in Saudi Arabia. His honest approach to life led him to a career change and a commitment to continuous learning. Hi, Mohamed.
Hello, hi.
Hi, how are you doing today?
Good, great. Thanks so much for having me.
Great. You're in Dubai, right?
Yep, that is correct, yeah.
So how is the weather, temperature?
Absolutely terrible these days, yeah. I mean, I usually have a very good indication on how hot it's getting when my Diwa bill starts to climb off the roof. That's my indication that, yeah, it's getting very hot.
Oh my God. Okay, so let's start to know your career path, and not only career, but life story, life journey. Let's talk about your family, because everything started from family, right?
100%. So to begin with, I'd like to say that I'm an Egyptian national. I was born and raised in Saudi Arabia, and I'm very lucky, I'd say. I'm very fortunate that I was born to very understanding parents. Let me put it that way. I had two sisters. I was the only son, the only boy at home, I would say. A lot of us might necessarily think that boy gets a lot of spoiling. Does that make sense? But it was very different. I believe that, I was given a lot of responsibility early on in life, especially with my younger sister. I was always expected to be a mentor. I look back at it now and I say that if I wasn't given that kind of responsibility in life, I don't think I was going to be able to accept so many different changes that happened in my life later on. Mm-hmm. I do thank my parents for that, even though maybe back during that time, I didn't see the positive behind it. Mm-hmm. But I do definitely, looking back at it now, reflecting now, I do see the positives with what I'm doing in life right now.
What did you like to do as a child?
I was an extroverted child, I think, up to the probably the second or third grade of school. I think that going into maybe third, fourth, and fifth grade, things started to change. I did end up being a little bit of an introvert, or more of an introvert compared to the person that I was earlier on. And I slowly started to fall down that rabbit hole of not really having a lot of friends and spending a lot of time on my own. So in second grade, I was in a very nice school, moved to another school in third grade, and I only had one friend in that school. Yeah, it's a big school, just one friend. And I remember very clearly that school was very close to the airport. And all the airplanes that were lining up to land in Jeddah's international airport would fly over our playground. And that friend of mine was also very interested in airplanes, right? So we had 2 recess sessions. We would spend every recess session in the playground looking at the airplanes as they turned to final approach and as they flew over our school. I think that's where the fire, that early light, that candle started to burn inside of me with the passion to become a pilot. Now, I think life has a very interesting pattern of feeding that passion that you've got. I think it was around the 5th grade. My mom was a doctor. She's a dermatologist. She moved hospitals and she was now working for the Saudi Arabian Airlines hospital in Jeddah.
Oh my God.
That allowed us to move to a compound that had all, I would say, Saudi Arabian Airlines staffs, flight attendants, and pilots, right? So pilots who worked for Saudi Arabian Airlines at the time would stay in that compound. And funny enough, I started to make some friends in the compound, and their parents would be pilots. So I started to get more of an exposure of what, as a family, living with a father who's a pilot looks like. But, even though it was those friends that I had, their lives were a little bit up and down. Their dads were not really around all the time, but it was still something so interesting to me that, every time I'd be riding my bicycle to a friend's house who his dad was a pilot, and I'd see his dad coming out of the house with their uniform on, getting ready to get in their car and, drive to the airport to fly a plane. That was always like, wow. How does a human fly an airplane? Look at how big the airplane is. It was so magical and fascinating to me.
It's interesting. I do believe that environment affects, right?
Yeah.
Or now next choice. In terms of profession, the university, and etc.
100%. My father was very supportive of me wanting to become a pilot. So I remember he bought me a joystick that I could connect to a computer we had at home. And I had another friend who was a tech gizmo, and he ended up downloading the Microsoft Flight Simulator game on my computer. And I was able to just, use my joystick and go on some flights, I would say, around random airports, just all virtually, obviously. But I would say maybe being on my own during that period of time gave me that space to fall in love with that passion even more.
So you had a dream to be a pilot, and what was next?
I remember back in the time, during that period of time, my mother, who has obviously, as a doctor for Saudi Arabian Airlines, has dealt with lots of pilots and seen lots of flight attendants and lots of, I would say, crew. And going through conversations with them, she found that a lot of them told her, hey, let him actually get a bachelor's degree first. Let him go to university first. Once he's done with that, he can go ahead and, get his pilot's license. Because the thing about flying is it's not really a degree. All you get is a license. And life is very uncertain, I would say. And one of the things that a lot of pilots were telling my mother is if he, for whatever reason, at any point in time gets ill, that could be the end of his career. So the plan was that I would still go get my bachelor's degree. And then once that happens, I would move on to pursue getting a pilot's license. And as usual, growing up in a Middle Eastern household, especially an Egyptian household, my dad was an engineer. My mom was a doctor. I had no idea what other degrees and I can apply to, what I can do in university. It was either you go to engineering or you go into med school. Med school was obviously a big no. I had no interest in becoming a doctor. And the only thing that did make sense during that period of time is, hey, you like airplanes, you love cars, you love motorcycles, anything that basically has wheels and drives, moves forward. Mechanical engineering made I would say, the most sense. And that's what I applied for. And lucky enough, a couple of weeks later, I get my acceptance email from AUS that I made it into mechanical engineering. I was accepted to that. Now, obviously, my parents rejoiced. I had no idea what I was getting into, but yeah, I ended up coming to the UAE. That was in 2013, September of 2013. Unfortunately, though, towards the very end of my education as an engineer, so probably going through junior year, which is year 3, is when I started to realize, no, this is not what I want to be doing. This is not even what I would want to have as a backup. I won't be happy with this degree. Unfortunately, that period of time was, I would say, very difficult. In late 2015, my father started to get very ill.
Mm-hmm.
And in summer of 2016, he was diagnosed with stage 4 stomach cancer.
I'm sorry for that.
He passed away a year later. He passed away in July of 2017. Actually, a couple of days from now would be his, annual passing remembrance, I would say. His remembrance, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Very difficult period of time because, as you can imagine, I'm going through all of these mental conflicts where I'm worried about my dad. I'm not spending enough time with him because he's obviously in Saudi Arabia and I'm here in the UAE. I'm very unhappy with the decision that I've made, but I'm also very close to graduation. There was just so much that was going through my mind, and the decision of leaving engineering wasn't an easy one. So you can imagine mentally how much of a struggle that period of time was, because if I tried to make any kind of decision, there were so many other implications that I needed to think about. It can't be about myself at that point, right? I needed to think about how it would impact my dad, who's sick and unable to work at that period of time, my mom, how would it impact our family in general? So I decided to pull through. I decided to keep going through whatever I was going through. I then graduated in May of 2018. I was then surprised with another, I would say, bombshell upon graduation that, given that my father has passed away at that point, we were unable to go back to Saudi Arabia. I was unable to go back to Saudi Arabia. So that meant I can either stay in the UAE and get a job in Dubai, or I'd have to accept the fact that I've got no other option than going back home to Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, I was not ready to go back to Egypt. So I tried as hard as I could to stay in Dubai. And fortunately, I came to realize that the engineering jobs here in Dubai and the salaries that they pay are very low, very, very low. I felt very undervalued in the job market. And even though I could have still maintained, supporting myself, it didn't make sense. It really didn't make sense, because at that point, coming back to the point that I was the only son, the expectation now would be, I've got to go back home. I've got to take care of my mother. I've got to take care of my sisters. I got to make sure that I am now the man of the house. I need to be there for them. And the world was just pushing me in that direction where I have no other option than to go back to Egypt. I remember, I think it was towards the end of 2018 is when I took the decision that I'm going to have to close the Dubai chapter. I'm going to have to move back to Egypt, and I'm going to have to try and, just try and live, try to do something and just regain focus and get back on track.
You was talking about really hard time for you.
Absolutely.
And I have a question. How did you manage this crisis that you talked about? What helped you? Because I think maybe someone who will be listening to this podcast will find something very important for him at the time he's listening. Let's talk about it.
I had one professor who I was very close to during the last year of university. She was my, so there was an elective course that I decided to sign up for. It was a women's studies class. And that professor, I believe, played a huge role in me trying to get over those feelings. I remember I walked into one of her classes. This was right before I graduated. I walked into one of the classes and she knew me from a previous class. So she knew that my father was sick during that previous class. She knew that my father had passed. So when I walked into the new semester, into that class, I remember she called me to her office one day, and she asked me to close the door, and she started to speak to me. She very bluntly told me, Mohamed, you are not okay. You are not processing those feelings. You're not allowing yourself to feel the grief. You're trying to act as if you're okay, and you're trying to push those feelings away and just pretend like everything is fine. And I remember right as soon as I heard those sentences, I walked out of the office a couple minutes later. I went back down to my car, and as soon as I got into my car, I think that was one of the first times that I profusely cried. Because I think I started to allow myself to process those feelings.
To process the feelings, yeah. Mm-hmm.
The biggest lesson, I believe, from that era is learning that it's very important as a human being to allow those feelings to take their course of action inside of you, be it happy feelings or be it sad feelings, right? You cannot push those feelings away. It is extremely unhealthy if you do so.
Yeah, that's true. I do agree with you. It's very important not to just contain, not to keep the feelings inside, because they will not disappear.
They won't.
They will be inside. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. They will never disappear.
That's true. Let's talk about it. I mean, about your, let's say, pilot time.
After being in Egypt, moving back there, I got a job very briefly at a construction company. It was an electromechanical contracting company. Spent only 3 months in that company, 3 to 4 months. Yeah. Realized that, that's really not what I want to do. I actually did that job just to give myself the chance to experience what it could be like to use my degree. And like we were mentioning at the beginning of the podcast, I think life has a very funny way, an interesting way of driving you towards your dreams. I remember I was going through Instagram one day, just scrolling through, and I found a school in South Africa that basically teaches you flying, right? And allows you to go through getting your licenses. So I went ahead, I applied, I went through the process, and I think that was around May of 2019. By end of August 2019, I was on a plane heading to South Africa. And for once in life, I was starting I started to feel like things were taking a very nice turn towards where I wanted to be in life. I still remember, it was basically, we flew out of Egypt in batches. Landing in South Africa, we were greeted by the staff at school, and the whole experience of being in South Africa. South Africa, by the way, as a country, is just absolutely gorgeous.
It's another my dream.
You have to make a plan and go there if you haven't been. It's absolutely gorgeous. So my flight school was in Johannesburg, and I remember receiving my first pilot's license, which was my student pilot license. Mm-hmm. I was very proud of that, very extremely proud of that. But that's the first thing you need to start, actually going into the field and flying. I remember the moment my first instructor was assigned to me, and during my very first discovery flight, believe it or not, I was so close to throwing up, very, very close to throwing up, because when you're flying those smaller aircrafts, you don't really feel it on the bigger airplanes that we get on to travel, but those smaller aircrafts, they get really affected by whatever wind you fly through. And any turbulence is 100 times worse compared to what we feel in our commercial aircrafts that we fly in. So I remember we were flying over some mountains, and I wasn't really paying attention. And my instructor probably realized that I wasn't paying attention. So he pushed down on the yoke, on the flight controls. And when that happens real quick, your body starts to levitate really slowly. Kind of like what you see in movies when you when that gravity sensation starts to go over. And I think that really unsettled my stomach. But one very interesting aspect here that I remember is after we were done with the first flight, I started to ask myself, am I actually going to be able to do this? Because believe it or not, you're in the aircraft. You're responsible for doing everything from A to Z. So you're flying the airplane. You're looking at all the instruments in front of you. You're constantly looking at your altitude. You're constantly looking at your vertical airspeed. You're constantly looking at your fuel gauges. You're constantly looking at whatever's right in front of you. You're monitoring that. At the same time, you're looking outside at all times to scan for other airplanes. You're also talking on the radio to make sure that all other airplanes in your vicinity can hear you and acknowledge your presence. And it scared me. It scared me because I knew that that was my passion. I knew that that was my dream, but I was like, am I going to be able to do this? And, it teaches you one thing: never, ever doubt yourself, because a couple of flights down the line, and I remember I was doing everything that I thought a couple of flights before I was going to be unable to do. I was flying the airplane. I was looking at the instruments. I was making the radio calls. And I remember, I think it was into my fourth flight where my instructor was courageous enough to allow me to try and land the airplane myself. I remember he told me, "Hey, Mohamed, just believe in yourself. I'm sitting right next to you. I've got the controls in my hands. If I feel like you're messing something up, I'll take control. So don't worry, just go for it."
Mm-hmm.
And it's a moment I would never forget, landing for the very first time, even though it was such a bumpy landing, but it's fine. It felt like such an achievement. One achievement that I felt I haven't done in such a long time. You're bringing some very good memories back. I like that. I like that.
It's great. It's great. It was one of the goals. How did you find out about the sales and account management field? Because now you are in this field, as far as I understand, right?
Yeah, that is correct. Yeah. One thing that did happen, unfortunately, during my pilot education was COVID kicked in. I remember it was the 9th of March, 2020, when I tested for my private pilot license and I passed my test. And I was meant to fly back to Egypt, I think on the 15th or 16th of March. But during that day, I remember as soon as I landed and, I got the green light that I passed my test, that's when the very first, I would say, rumor went out that South Africa might be closing its borders down. I remember I didn't want to take the risk of being stuck in South Africa. So I went online, I changed my ticket to the 10th of March. And on the 10th, I was on an airplane flying back to Egypt. So yeah, 2020 was a year that I spent just reflecting on life. And it was during that time, by the way, that I started to get acquainted with sales and account management. A couple of my friends who I met during university were also engineers, and they left engineering and they got into sales and account management. I had absolutely no idea what account management was, what sales was. I mean, you obviously know what sales is, but the broad term, the general term of what sales is about. But I had no idea what the details of the job were like. I was starting to realize, by the way, that I needed to stop, unfortunately, my pilot education, because prior to COVID, there were very, I would say, good opportunities that were opening up in the flight world for pilots, for upcoming pilots. After COVID, unfortunately, that changed a lot because the market, at least from what I've heard, the market was getting saturated with a lot of pilots that had experience but lost their job during COVID. So the expectations were that once airlines started to open up these positions again, they would obviously be wanting to hire those pilots that had experience compared to pilots that had absolutely no experience. I'm very critical. I like to think of a lot of details. I'm very detail oriented in general. So I started thinking about the path of, can I potentially get into an airline? Yes or no? So I made the very tough decision of having to put that passion down, but I obviously didn't want to get back into engineering. And that's when those friends of mine, they were like, "Hey, why don't you try and apply for sales and account management? Whatever comes first." And I remember I started applying to a company here in Dubai. I applied 10 times to that same company. I think it was 8 to 10 times that I applied. And funny enough, the very first time I was rejected, that same HR employee that rejected my first application was the same HR employee that sent me a job offer.
Oh, really?
After that 9th time. Yeah, exactly. It was so funny.
The same person, you mean?
Same person who rejected my very first application was the same guy that sent me an offer after my 9th application. And I think that just taught me to never give up, right? Never give up, and also have some faith, right? And that's when I got my first job here in Dubai. And I was a sales account manager. I was doing indirect sales, to be specific. And let me tell you, it was an absolute shock getting into sales, right?
Why?
Yeah, an absolute shock, because you hear so many things about what sales jobs could be like, but then the reality comes down to the point that it requires a lot of resilience, and it requires a lot of adaptability, and you always need to be a quick learner, right? You know, as a salesperson, there's a target that you always need to achieve, be it a monthly target or a quarterly target. And you're always going to be questioned by your superiors about that target. And there will be moments, you need to accept the fact that there will be quarters or months where you're not really achieving those numbers. Others where you'll be doing very, very well. So that resilience comes into play during those periods of times where you're not really achieving your numbers. Because other than that, if you don't have that resilient mentality, the pressure can really crack you. The pressure can really get to you.
So for you, it was a new field, actually.
Yeah.
So let's give some tips to our listeners how to apply and not to give up.
Maybe knowing someone that can allow you to make it into the field. I'm gonna very honestly say, and you know, this is about my experience, I was lucky. I'm not going to say I was lucky, and I think it was meant to be for me to get into this field. I'm always going to be very grateful to my superior in that very first company that I worked for, because during the interview process, I remember very well that he very bluntly told me, Mohamed, I am taking a risk on you. I'm taking a risk on you, but I like your vibe. And I like your personality. And I really think that you've got the potential to make it in this field. I will forever be grateful to that person because he gave me a chance, right? I remember very well during my interview process, I fluked my final interview with this guy. He gave me 2 chances. 2 chances.
Really?
I had one interview with him. I fluked that. I had a really bad interview that first time. And he actually paused that interview and he told me, hey, Mohamed, look, you're not doing very well. I like you, so I'm going to give you another chance. And he gave me another day to prepare, and I still messed up that second interview. I still did not do very well. And he took a risk on me, and I would always be very grateful for that. But maybe the one thing that I can give as an advice is just not give up, because I could have very easily stopped applying to that company after my first application. Right?
Yeah, sure.
I applied 9 times and I sometimes got rejections and sometimes I didn't even get a single reply. And by the way, funny story, that same day I got my job offer, I was contacted twice by the same company. So it was just meant to be, right? It just happened, right? But I never gave up. I tried so hard because I wanted to make it into that company, and I also wanted to come back to Dubai. And I thought that, you know, that's my only way in.
Yeah. That's true. When you don't give up and when you believe that you will get your, let's say, goal, for example, in this case, the job, yeah?
Yeah.
You know, something, maybe someone, they give us this opportunity, right?
Exactly.
I do believe in it. At Fortis, collaboration is at the core of what we do, and it's inspiring to see how our global team comes together to solve complex problems. I recall a time where our R&D teams in Europe, Latam, and Asia had to work closely to launch our first MVP. Despite the time zone differences, the teams coordinated seamlessly, holding late night and early morning meetings to ensure everything was on track. The MVP was a success, and it was a testament of the power of teamwork and dedication. Please, let's talk about your typical day. What does this day look like for you at your work right now?
I think now, so obviously I've moved roles quite a few times since I came to Dubai and started working here. Right now I'm in the account management field. So that really, I deal a lot with existing customers, right? I don't do a lot of new acquisition anymore. It's more of existing customers. And my role specifically focuses on trying to grow these accounts, right? Within obviously our company's ecosystem. So I would say that my day is nowhere near ideal at this point. I think that with every passing day, what matters the most to me is that I always reflect on myself. It's one thing that I do every time that I go back home, and that goes back to me being very critical of myself. Every day I go back home, I sit down with myself and I actually talk to myself. I don't write anything down, but I just talk to myself and I ask myself a very realistic question. What do I think that I can do better tomorrow that I did not do today? And what can I do to make sure that I am more efficient, more productive? You know, once you realize that 70% of our day is spent at work, and then we only get 2 days off during the week, right? You realize that your whole life revolves around work, and then wanting to be efficient and wanting to be your best self at work becomes such a priority to you.
By the way, did you have a mentor on your career journey so far?
I've had several mentors, not necessarily direct managers, not necessarily line managers. I've had colleagues who were mentors, obviously managers who were mentors. I think that generally talking, socializing with your colleagues at work, not just people from your department, but people from other departments as well, having that connection with your colleagues is so crucial, because you never know when you could potentially learn something that could be life-changing for you, right? That's what happened, by the way, with my current company. I started out as a sales, as an account executive. That's part of the sales department. I am now part of the account management department, but I believe that speaking to the account management team during my time in sales, speaking to the head of account management globally during my time in sales, is what kind of made me want to make that move, right? Had I not spoken to those people and exposed myself to their scope of work, I wouldn't have realized that this is a move that I want to make, and this is part of the career progression that I want to have in this field nowadays.
What is your, strategy? How do you use the networking?
I'll take just a quick step back here before I explain that. During my university years, I realized how extremely important it is to get out of that bubble that I was in during my school years and try to get back to being outgoing, being the extroverted person that I've always been, talking, socializing. And I think my university years were very good practice for me, because I would randomly sometimes walk up to people, just have random conversations, just get acquainted. And yeah, it never really hurts, right? And I think that's the very similar approach that I follow today, at work specifically, and even online. Sometimes I'll just drop a message off to someone if I think that person is in a very similar field to mine, if they work at a competing company, or even if they work at a company that is a partner to our company, whatever the case might be. I'm always trying to make sure that I connect. And connections can be as simple as a follow on LinkedIn, for example.
for example. Yeah.
or an actual connect, and they can go as far as sending out a message, You realize in Dubai that there are so many circles that these people, by the way, meet, and they talk to each other a lot. I mean, I think technology allows us nowadays to easily find these circles. I mean, it's just a matter of getting out of your comfort zone. Very recently, I've fallen victim to, I've gone to a point during the past 6-7 months where I realized that, hey, I'm really just going through the same cycle every single day. I need to change it up. And with the support of my loving wife, actually, she was the one who pushed me to do that. I'm very interested in racing, sim racing, not real racing. So there's a place here that I started going to, that hosts weekly to bi-weekly sim races. And I would say that just by going there, I met some very fantastic people who are now very close friends of mine. And believe it or not, one of those people I'm actually on the course of starting a business with, right? So you never really know what can happen once you start speaking to people. And I think Dubai's environment is very welcoming of that.
Yeah, that's true.
Especially everyone here, by the way, we all leave our countries and come to Dubai to build a life and work. So people are actually a lot more accepting of speaking to a stranger, maybe compared to somewhere else. So maybe I would say foster that, because you're not really going to find that opportunity in so many other different places.
Mohamed, how do you continue to grow and to develop professionally?
A lot of the progression that I think I'm doing right now is by trying to speak to those said mentors all the time. That goes back to the point of myself being very critical. I like to always, just check in with myself and try to pinpoint those weaknesses that I have, and always ask for feedback, always ask for advice from the people that I work with. And sometimes from just friends, my wife, we always have sessions where we sit down, we talk to each other about things that are happening, be it at work or personally, and how that person, for example, my wife thinks that I should do this to try and improve in that certain point, and so on and so forth. Now, how would I want to keep growing? Obviously, at one point, I have a plan to take a couple of courses. I have a plan, hopefully, to get my MBA, but I'm not planning to do this before maybe 2 years from now.
Okay, and by the way, in your opinion, how can companies encourage the growth and development of their employees?
Let me answer this in a different way. I think one of the worst things a company can do is micromanage the people that are working internally. Micromanage. I think that giving the employees the space to explore and find their own rhythm, I think, is what fosters a healthy environment, first of all. Because if you think about it, if a company micromanages the employees, I mean, all of us want to keep our jobs, right? So if we're being micromanaged and we're not finding any other opportunities to leave, we're going to get the job done, right? We're always going to get the job done. Eventually, the employee will always get the job done. However, do you just want them to get the job done, or do you want them to actually be, I would say, getting the job done and at the same time, willing to blow an arm off for the company, if that makes sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
I believe that allowing employees to find their own rhythm fosters a very healthy environment internally. And when you have happy employees, you don't only get the job done, you get the job done, and you have people that absolutely would go miles and lengths to make sure that the company is always, at its best.
Mm-hmm.
Just to honestly really say it, I think that, at least from my two experiences thus far in the UAE, and from what I'm hearing from my closer friends who work in other companies, I think more and more companies are starting to realize that that is the way forward. Obviously, you get outliers here and there, but I think that globally as well, that's an approach that a lot of companies are taking, allowing people to lead the way. Does that make sense? Putting a little bit more trust in your employees and just trusting that they're going to get there. They're going to make it happen.
Yeah. But, it's very difficult to trust people. For example, when you do your work by your own hands, you can trust yourself. But when you delegate something, of course, you should trust to your team and etc. But for some managers, it's something, about losing of control.
Yes. While I completely agree with that point, I think that, and I'm only comparing this with my experience. I was lucky enough to not be micromanaged in my jobs thus far. And I think that a good manager is one that realizes when you're starting to, hey, you need to now start, applying the brakes and making a U-turn, right? Because you're straying off course instead of taking control completely, right? Because at that point, first of all, you end up loving that manager a lot more, right? And you end up loving the job a lot more. And that's when it turns into a learning experience for me as an employee, because I was given the freedom to explore my own way. And then my manager was looking at what I'm doing, right? They're looking. So they can see the direction that I'm going in. And once they realize that, no, this is not the way I should be going in, very slowly steering me back on track, I think that's the best approach that managers can follow. But at the same time, by the way, I completely understand that some people, and again, I said managers can be humans. I mean, they're humans in the end, right? So maybe not everyone is able to do that.
Yeah, sure. We're different.
I think I'm just following the approach of giving my own very, 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 very personal experience.
Thank you for your honest answers to my questions.
One of the challenges that I faced in life in general is not having someone to speak to a lot of times. So if this podcast reaches anyone who needed to hear this, who needs to listen to this, right? Needs an honest, I think we live in a world where there's so much fake news everywhere nowadays. And especially with the rise of podcasts, everyone is out there. Apparently everyone is so successful. Apparently everyone is doing amazing in life. And that's not true. Come on. I mean, are you all millionaires, right? Are you all billionaires?
I call it like successful success.
Exactly. I mean, right. I mean, wow, all of you guys are doing amazing. It must be me that's an absolute failure. And I think passing on that normal experience. I'm a normal human being after all. And that's the life of a normal human being. And I think maybe hopefully that's the kind of experience that I want whoever listens to this podcast to actually realize that, hey, it's okay. In a world where you hear so much success around, and I'm not calling myself a loser, but I'm calling myself a normal human being, someone who has gone through the whole journey, has gone through, I've lost the passion of flying, but I'm not on the ground weeping, right? I'm here still pushing through, going through each and every challenge, embracing it. And I know I'm going to get there. I know that I'll be there, right? Maybe to me, that was the most important thing of, the most important part of being on this podcast is I want to make sure that if someone needs to listen to this, they hear it. You're going to get there. You're going to make it. Just keep pushing through. Don't stop. Under no circumstance. Stopping is not an option. Keep going. Sometimes you're going to need to sit down, cry your eyes out, and then you keep going again. But that's life. You just keep going. You don't stop.
Yeah, don't give up. It's the main idea of our podcast today.
Don't give up. Exactly. Don't give up. Never give up.
Thank you, Mohamed. It was a really interesting time and useful time at the same time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was very, very comfortable to work with you. to record this podcast.
Same here. Absolutely. Same here. Same here.
Thank you. It was our last episode of Everything is Personal by Fortis. We help businesses thrive in the digital world, turning their dreams into reality. In these 8 episodes, we got the chance to meet interesting people, talk about their professional journey, and learn that, like in life, there is more than one way to build a career. If you're interested in joining our team, subscribe to our LinkedIn page. The link is in the episode description. This podcast is produced by Ep8 Podcasts. Executive producer Alexandra Volkova, producer Darya Sannikova, editor Livia Stevaux, sound engineer Mikhail Vasilev, composer Ksenia Kazantseva, cover illustrator Bryan, and I'm your host Victoria Belousova. Listen to Everything is Personal on Amazon Music, Apple Podcast, Castbox, Spotify, and whenever you listen to the podcasts. Add us to your favorites and leave your feedback. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you for listening and goodbye.